Yes, sir. I welcome you, sir. Dr. Atul Thakur, sir. Sir is working as associate professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Indian Institute of Technology, Patna. Sir has completed PhD in Mechanical Engineering from University of Maryland College Park. Sir has completed master degree from IIT Bombay. Sir has completed Bachelor of Engineering from University of Mumbai. He has authored number of research papers in reputed journals, conference and book chapters. He has presented many research papers in international conference in abroad. Sir has working on many research and development projects sponsored by Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Sir is also working on project sponsored by Swasthya Action Plan under MHRD. So I welcome you, sir, and thank you, sir, from your busy schedule. You have agreed to present your session, sir, in our FDP program. So thank you, sir. And now you can start your session, sir.
Thank you. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it is visible, sir.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for confirming. All right, so a very good morning to all the participants and the faculty members. So the topic of today's talk is bio-inspired mobile robotics. My name is Atul Thakur and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Patna. This is my group and the vision of my lab is to design and fabricate smart, economical, automated robotic and mechatronic systems. And the present projects going on in my lab include bio-inspired robots for municipal solid waste sorting and magnetic micro-robotics, which I will give you some glimpse of today. So before I get into some of the research results from our group, I would like to introduce you to the field of mobile robotics. So often what we consider as science fiction in due course, as the time goes by, it becomes reality. And I'll give you an example. This is a picture from a 1920 play written by a Czech writer, Karel Čapek. So in this play, he introduced some characters which looked like humans, but were actually not humans. They were some machines. So in those days, there were no concepts of robots. In fact, in that very play, the character that Karel Čapek introduced was called as Robota. This word Robota in the Czech language means hard work or slave. So it turns out that since then, 100 years have elapsed, and today we actually have some machines which are having human-like figure, which is no more a fiction. So what was fiction over here now has become a reality. So sorry. And then in addition to that, we also have some robots like what you can see here, which do not exactly look like humans, do not have anthropomorphic structure, but they do have similarity to some biological structures. Like for example, on the left hand side, you can see something like an arm, which resembles a human arm, but it can be much larger and much more powerful than human arm. So in general, we can say that robots are the machines that can be used for solving or to perform tasks that are either dull, dirty, or dangerous. One of these 3 Ds. Today, these industrial manipulators can be used for entirely replacing human labor in assembly shops. You can see these long assembly lines in automobile companies completely operated by robots, as you can see in this picture. These robots that you see in the top picture are all stationary robots. That means that these robots are fixed or tethered to one place in the shop floor. On the other hand, there is another category of robots which are not tethered, which can move around. They are called as mobile robots. Mobile robots also fall into 2 categories. They can be either industrial or outdoor robots. Today, we will be discussing mobile robots. So a mobile robot is that robot that can move unsupervised in real world to perform a given task. So what do we mean by unsupervised? Well, if we have to give very minimum input or command to the robot, or in other words, I can say that if we have to give high level command to the robot and the robot itself recognizes the low level commands, then we can say that it is unsupervised. So to give you an example of that, let us say that you have one remote controlled car. You know, remote controlled car that children play, those are toys, right? So in those toys, you might have seen that the remote control has 2 controls. One is for acceleration in the forward direction, and another one is for steering. There's a joystick with which you can steer the wheels. So if I ask you to take that car from one place and take it to some other place, then it will involve a lot of deft actions. You have to basically change the acceleration and then turn the steering and so on and so forth. On the other hand, suppose, just imagine, hypothetically imagine that to that toy you give a command that go from the kitchen to the drawing room, and that command the robot breaks down into all the accelerations and steering that it has to take by itself. Then we will start calling that as a robot. So if we have to give low level commands, that is, we have to give all the steering and forward motion and all that, then it is basically a toy. Or in other words, we can call it as a teleoperated machine. On the other hand, if we give high level commands, such as go from point A to point B, and the robot itself recognizes what commands it should give to go from point A to point B, then we would say that it is a robot. So in the bottom, you can see large number, like some of the mobile robots that have been invented over past few years. This is by no means an exhaustive list. These are some examples. So you can see back in 1969, this robot was developed at Stanford University by Nielsen. You can see this large control unit, because in those days, the control units used to be much larger. The computers used to be much larger than what we have today. Because of the VLSI technology, now we can have much smaller chips, processor chips. At any rate, so you can see Asimo developed by Honda. And then this is the example of a quadruped robot developed by Boston Dynamics. Its name is Big Dog. And then here you can see the Mars rover that is operating on the surface of Mars, developed by NASA. So based upon the applications, mobile robots fall into various categories. It can be an automated guided vehicle, service robots, cleaning and lawn care robot, social robots, field robots, inspection, reconnaissance, surveillance, and exploration robots. So here, okay, so for some reason this video is not working today. Let's see. Just excuse me for a second. Okay, so yeah, sorry about that delay. So you can see this automated guided vehicle here. So these are robots that can move in a factory shop floor and can be used for transporting materials from one place to another place. So this is an example of the Toyota plant where you can see these materials being transported on these vehicles which are driven by humans. But when humans drive these, then it becomes much more difficult for them to perform these tasks and have that attention throughout the day, right? So instead of them, now people are using these automated guided vehicles where you can see that drivers are not driving them, but a computer is driving this vehicle. So these automated guided vehicles can transport materials from one place to another place in a factory shop floor. In olden days, floor mounted wires or cables used to be used for locating these robots to determine the location of these robots. As opposed to that, now wireless localization is being used. So this can be done by means of laser-based triangulation. So today, these kind of robots are used in large warehouses for transporting materials from one place to another place. For example, Amazon is using these type of robots in its warehouses, and they have a dedicated wing called as Amazon Robotics that does development. Here you can see service robots. So here you can see these robots that can transport materials in a factory, which not in a factory, but in institutions where more number of humans are working. So compared to automated guided vehicles, these service robots operate in environment where there are large number of people. For example, you can have restaurants, or you can have museums or hospitals where you have many people working. So there, these robots can be used for transporting materials from one place to another place. So naturally, these robots have to be more safe compared to automated guided vehicles. As you can see here, that these robots can avoid obstacles, and their geometry is also such that when they collide with humans, there is minimum harm or damage. It has more sophisticated obstacle avoidance capabilities. You can see that if inadvertently a human being comes in front of the robot, it is equipped with the sensors that will stop it. You can see this, right? Then the other category of robot includes cleaning robots. So nowadays, these robots are also available in India. So these are vacuum cleaning robots that can move around in an unsupervised way. So if you give command to the robot for cleaning the room, it will perform scanning of the room, and then it will use its vacuum based cleaning device to suck all the dust. So unlike the other category of robots, such as the automated guided vehicles or the service robots, where the target is to take material from one place to another place, here the objective is to cover as much floor as possible in as less time as possible. So based upon the application, the way we program the robot, that also varies, right? So in the case of service robots, the programming should be done in such a way that it should always avoid obstacles and at the same time take the material as fast as possible to the desired location. On the other hand, in the case of cleaning robots, the job is to perform coverage of a given area. The other category of robots is social robots. So in many countries, the population is aging very, very rapidly. For example, in Japan, a vast majority of population is getting older. So there, in order to provide care to the elderly population, robots are being used. So these robots have to have a shape which looks much more like human, so that humans can easily interact with these robots. See, when we are talking about dealing with humans, then there should be some kind of human interaction with the robot, and these social robotics area is being developed keeping that in mind, where You know, the robots can have human-like shape, they can have human-like movements, and sometimes even human-like gestures. So as you can see that this robot, although it has a human-like shape, but you can very easily tell that it's a robot, right? Because of its very robot-like motion. So nowadays, people are working on developing robots which are looking more and more like humans. So there is a lot of need for research in this area. Sometimes for entertainment purpose, these kind of robots are also developed, which can act like pets. So this Ivo robot on the right hand side is a robotic pet. So these are all robots that I have shown you are basically operating in a regulated environment. By regulated environment, what I mean is that we know about the environment. For example, if there is a pet robot, then it is operating in a domestic home-like environment. So we know what kind of obstacles are around it and what kind of surfaces are there. Or if we are talking about a factory AUV, I'm sorry, a factory automated guided vehicle AGV, then we know the factory environment, right? We know what kind of floor is there and what kind of temperatures we are talking about and so on and so forth. However, there are environments where we don't know about the environment. The environment is unregulated. For example, like interplanetary exploration. So here you can see that we don't know about the Martian surface. So the robot should be able to take care of unknown dangers that may be present on the on a different planet. It's not only about the interplanetary environments, but suppose there is an agricultural field where the robot is used for applying chemicals or disinfectants or pruning or picking fruits. So there also the environment is primarily unregulated. We don't know the terrain, we don't know the softness of the soil and so on and so forth, right? Or in mines, for example. Mines also environment is primarily unknown. So all these types of robotic applications are known as field robotics applications. So in field robotics, the way robots are programmed should take care of unknown environmental factors such as terrain or such as the wind or uh, maybe unknown obstacles, moving obstacles, and so on and so forth. So here in this animation, you can see the Mars rover which enters the Martian surface, and eventually the rover lands on the Martian surface and starts exploring it. So this rover, obviously this is not a real video. It's more of a animation to give an idea of what is going on. But now we have available all these pictures from Mars sent by Martian rover. But this is how it might have fallen. Okay. So once this rover lands, then there is no idea about what is the environment. In fact, the whole purpose of rover going to Martian surface is to find out what is there, right? Now, you can imagine that the distance between Earth and Mars is very large. It's of the order of few light minutes. That means that even light takes tens of minutes to go from Earth to Mars, and so are any other electromagnetic signals. So suppose that we want to operate this rover via remote control, then by the time we will give a break command to uh, the robot might have already fallen into a ditch. So therefore, the robot should be programmed with autonomous behaviors. And from Earth, we should be only sending the commands that are of high level. That means scan this area without falling into ditch. And then the robot should be able to go around, protect itself from ditches, protect itself from any uh, marsh or any kind of soft terrain where its wheels may get stuck, right? And then it should also take pictures. And also, it gets charged by solar power. So it should also seek for places where the sunlight is high uh, when the battery is draining, right? So all those behaviors are programmed on the robot. So in a nutshell, mobile robots have these three layers basically. Basically two layers, and third layer is the environment. So it has the software layer, which includes control, planning, mapping, and localization. And hardware layer, which involves the robot structure, actuator, microcontroller, and sensor, and that interacts with the environment. So uh, the robot structure is the overall structure of the robot. That means that whether it has wheels or legs, or what kind of shape and uh, physical components that does it have. Actuators are those parts that will provide the mechanical power to the robot structure. That means it may be an electric motor which makes the wheels rotate, or it may be a hydraulic or pneumatic actuator. Then microcontrollers are those pieces of hardware that will generate signals that will make these actuators move. And sensors are those pieces of electronics that will sense the environmental uh, effects. For example, what is the inclination, or what is the battery voltage, or it may detect what is the temperature, and so on and so forth. But once you have all this data available from sensors that goes into the microcontroller, this data has to be processed in order to generate suitable signal for the actuator. And that processing is done by the software layer. In the software layer, the topmost thing is the localization part, which determines where the robot is located. Once it is determined where the robot is located, then the robot should create a map around itself. And then it should generate a plan that will take the robot from one place to another place. And finally, this plan is executed by the controller software, which generates suitable signals, which is mounted on the microcontroller and which generates suitable signals for the actuators. And this is how a robot works at a very broad level. Now let's look into these things in more details. Are there any questions up until now before we move ahead with the rest of the presentation? Okay, so let's do this. Let's finish everything and then we can have a question answer session. So, so now what kind of environments robot operate in? Robots can operate in an environment which can be sandy, which can be fluid-based environment, and so on and so forth. So basically, robot influences the environment, and robots also get influenced by the environment. So these are different types of environment. Here you can see a robotic boat operating in an ocean wave. This is another example where a micro robotic system is trying to take drug from one place to another place, and there are large number of cells in the environment that the drug should not collide with. So that is another type of environment. The third type of environment is shown here, where the robot is moving on an uneven terrain, and it is trying to follow a human being. It is locating this red colored socks, and then it is trying to follow. So there is an asymmetric capability between the robot and the human. The humans run on legs, and it can jump over different kind of obstacles, whereas the robot works on wheels, so it has to go away from these kind of ditches. So in general, the robot has to solve motion planning problem. A motion planning problem can be described like this. We can have a robot that goes to a goal location, and it has to avoid the obstacles. That means it cannot go over the obstacles, while there may be terrain features where the robot, when it goes through, then it incurs some cost. So for example, let me give you an example. Let us say that there is a road which is like this, and there is some grass over here. The grass is shown using this shading. So let us say that robot is like a car. From top, we are looking from the top. These are the wheels of the robotic car. And now if I ask you this question, that how can robot reach to this goal location? So one option is that robot goes, the shortest path will be that robot goes like this, right? But we know that actually robot cannot go like this, because with wheels, it has to actually go straight and turn. Moreover, we also know that this terrain, this grass, is something on which we don't want the robot to go, because it will lead to wear and tear and so on and so forth. Whereas this road is kind of paved, so the robot can go very, very fast on this. So although distance is less, but we would not necessarily take that path, because we have to account for the vehicle kinematics, that means how the vehicle moves, and dynamics, and also sensor uncertainties, and the terrain. So in order to generate these paths, robot may use what is called as reactive autonomy, perceptive autonomy, or deliberative autonomy. In reactive autonomy, the robot takes care of controlling the vehicle with respect to environment based upon the immediate sensor information. And in so here the sensor information comes from the feedback of articulation, that means the joint motion and so on and so forth. In perceptive autonomy, it looks into the environment and looks at the surroundings, and based upon that it decides. In deliberative autonomy, the robot thinks deep. So deep thought takes time, and therefore it is slow. On the other hand, if robot uses perceive, think, act loops, then the action is fast. So in reality, the robot may take a combination of reactive, perceptive, and deliberative autonomy. So now let us look at the robot locomotion. So as such, the Earth's age is about 4.5 billion years, and the first life form emerged about 3.6 billion years ago. The locomotion took place about 585 million years ago. So in between this 3.6 billion to 585 million years, there was a process of evolution. And then in these 585 million years, the creatures evolved swimming, flying, crawling, and different kinds of locomotion patterns. And humans invented wheels few thousand years ago. So it makes sense if the the nature has evolved the locomotion over 500 or 600 million years, then it makes sense to take inspiration from the shape or body structure of creatures and develop robots or machines based upon that. However, we cannot exactly copy the animals or creatures because the mechanical complexity of creatures are very high, and the creatures or animals are made up of cells which are self-replicating. We cannot make those things in labs. Moreover, the energy generation and storage mechanisms in biological systems are uh, you know cannot be replicated in machines. So think about a small fruit fly, the fly that you see when you cut a fruit and then you leave it on your table. So even that small fruit fly can perform its own locomotion. It can get glucose or it can get food from the fruits, and it can produce its own energy. On the other hand, the machines that we develop, humans develop, they have batteries, and batteries size is kind of very big actually. The form factor is big. So uh, it turns out that exactly copying creatures is not possible, but we can make a functional copy, and that thing is known as bio-inspiration. So there are different types of locomotion available in the nature that is used to develop robots, and that I'm going to show you now. So there are terrestrial locomotion like walking, galloping, running, hopping, crawling, sliding, etc. Aquatic locomotion or waterborne locomotion like swimming, jet propulsion, and flight locomotion like flapping wing and gliding, perching. So let's look at the terrestrial locomotion or locomotion that operate on the land. So if you see this plot on the right hand side, this axis, vertical axis is unit power and horizontal axis is speed. What is unit power? This is basically the power consumption per unit mass being transported by means of various types of locomotion. And this is the speed on the horizontal axis. So ideally, we would like as high speed as possible and as low unit power consumption as possible. Okay, so we would ideally like to be here. But it turns out that there are different types of locomotion and they provide different varieties of these uh, speed and unit power consumption. In addition, we also see that these lines have different grayscale. So if grayscale is large, then the flexibility of that locomotion is less. And if it is faint, then it is more. So let's try to understand. If you look at railway wheel, it has relatively higher speed and lesser unit power consumption. That's the reason all our cargo and freight go by railway. But the flexibility is less. That is why this is more dark. So flexibility is less. We need infrastructure for this. On the other hand, these are less dark actually, right? Running and walking. So they give you a lesser, lower speed, right? Walking is having lesser speed and unit power consumption is more in this case. It takes more energy. Why? Because see, when you walk, then walking cannot be completed without stopping. Every time you walk, you stop and then you walk, you stop and then you walk, right? You cannot just continuously walk like the wheels roll. So whenever you stop, you are spending energy to stop, and that is reducing the efficiency of walking. So walking has lesser efficiency, but it gives you higher flexibility. With walking, you can go anywhere, unlike like railway wheel, which only goes on a railway track. Crawling, that is often observed in worms or snakes, that has maximum energy consumption. Okay, but and also it has less speed also. It has less speed and more energy consumption, so it is least preferred. But it gives you higher flexibility. That's the reason, you know, you will see snakes climbing trees, snakes going in water. They can do everything. So the moral of the story here is that when you are choosing a mechanism for any locomotion, then you look at speed, unit power consumption, and the flexibility. You cannot get best in all of these. You have to make a compromise based upon your requirement. So a legged locomotion, as you can see, can go on uneven terrains like this, but a wheel locomotion cannot. A wheel locomotion may not be able to recover from kind of upturned state, but a legged locomotion can. However, a wheel locomotion is more efficient, consumes less energy, less power. On the other hand, legged locomotion consumes more power. So if we look at an insect, as soon as it is born, it starts walking. If you look at a deer, it starts standing in about 20 minutes after its birth. And human, if you all of you know that it takes 1 to 2 years to start standing and walking. Why is that? If you look at an insect, it has 6 legs. So with 6 legs, it can easily stand without any effort. It is more stable, statically stable, if we want to say. On the other hand, a deer is also almost statically stable, but it has lots of controls, muscles that it has to learn to control. Humans stand on 2 legs, also known as biped. So it requires much more control effort, which humans have to learn over a period of 1 to 2 years. But with fewer number of legs, humans can perform much more complex motions. Humans can do gymnastics, Pradunova vault, and all those things which you don't see insects doing or even quadrupeds do. So there are different types of leg structures. You can see that this caterpillar over here, it has a leg which goes back and forth, and the body has a wave that moves from rear to back, and because of which it walks. So the leg shape is very, very simple actually. On the other hand, we can have this cheetah, which has a more complex quadruped structure, and all these legs are moved by means of these muscles. So it can gain a maximum speed of almost 80 miles per hour, and at that speed it can perform lots of complex motions also. And then we can have these creatures like a centipede, which can move with these hundreds of legs, but each leg is performing very simple motion. So in general, the number of legs needed for walking, minimum number of legs that are needed for walking is 2. One leg is needed for lifting, another for swinging. If we look at our own legs, it has more number of degrees of freedom than 2. So one, for example, you see at your ankle, another you see at your knee, but then at thigh also there is a degree of motion. That is there for additional control, for you can say higher maneuverability. But more the number of degrees of freedom, the mass increases, the control effort increases, energy requirement increases, and design complexity increases. So in general, the legs can be designed like this, where you can have these revolute joints, or you can have these slotted joints. So this goes up and down and this goes sideways, and that way leg can be controlled, or here both these joints can move in a rotary manner. So now I'll show you some robots that copy the biological locomotion. So here you can see hopping. as such, you don't see hopping directly in nature, but you might have seen kangaroos which hop on their rear legs, or you might have seen small children who join their legs and they hop around. So this robot actually performs that kind of locomotion. So here the mechanism works like this. You have this uh, projection on a wheel which rotates and stretches this elastic component and stores the elastic energy. And at the extreme, this is released, and because of that, the hopping motion is generated. So with this kind of hopping motion, only single point of contact is needed with the ground, which helps in jumping over uneven terrains. However, the static stability is not possible. That means this robot cannot stay without moving. It has to keep moving to stay. So these are bipeds. You know these Honda Asimo. I have shown you the video. So it has two legs, and with these two legs, it can move around. Or we can have multi-legged locomotion. Here you can see these legs, out of which some legs are in contact with the ground while some are off the ground. You can observe that minimum 3 legs are needed for stability. Means if there should be 3 legs in contact with the ground so that robot can be stable, can be statically stable. So here you can see these 3 legs or 3 points of contacts. So if you connect all these points of contact, what you obtain is called as a support polygon. So if we look at a support polygon, then we know that it will lie in one single plane. And if we project the center of mass of the robot in this plane, and if we ensure that this projected center of mass lies inside the support polygon, then we can say that the robot will remain stable. That means it will not fall down. You can imagine that if this point is on the periphery of this support polygon, then robot is more vulnerable to fall down. With even small push, it will fall down actually. Right? So it turns out that we can actually measure the amount of stability that a particular design has by determining the stability margin. So the stability margin is determined by finding out the shortest distance of the center of mass, projected center of mass from the edges of the support polygon. So if we have these distances d1, d2, d3, the minimum of that is called as stability margin. If stability margin is more, then robot is more stable. If stability margin is less, then robot is can be easily made to fall. We can also define longitudinal stability margin. When the robot moves, then we can find out the direction of movement, and along that direction of movement, the shortest distance from the edge is called as longitudinal stability margin. So quadruped robots means quad means 4 and ped means legs. So if a robot has 4 legs, then it is called as quadruped. These, you know that minimum 3 points of contacts are needed for static stability. So you can imagine that these can be statically stable. However, please note that when the leg is lifted up, the center of mass shifts. So the posture of the robot has to be changed in such a way that the projected center of mass is always guaranteed to lie inside the support polygon. So suppose that this is the support polygon, this triangle that I'm showing you, then the programming of the robot should be done in such a way that its center of mass, when you project in this plane of support polygon, it always is ensured to lie inside the support polygon. So this is a representation of the gait of robot. Please note that this is not GATE gait, this is GAIT gate. So this gate means that how the robot's legs move basically. So here you can see this diagram which shows the legs of the robot. The empty bubbles like this means that the leg is off the ground. That means it is not on the ground. It is not touching the ground, but above the ground. And when this bubble is filled, then we say that that particular leg is on the ground. So you can see different stages of movement. So in the beginning, two diagonal legs are above the ground. After that, these legs are moved forward and then all the legs are on the ground. And then other diagonal legs that you can see are lifted off and this process continues. So here we can see that there are instances when only two legs on ground. So these type of gates are not statically stable. That means that if the robot doesn't move at a certain speed, if it moves below a certain speed, then it is vulnerable to fall down actually. Okay. So that is why these are known as dynamic gates. Dynamic gates. So here you can see another type of gate where the front two legs are above the ground, then all the legs are above the ground. That means it is completely in the air. And then front two legs are on the ground and rear two legs are off the ground. And finally, all the legs are on the ground and this cycle continues actually, right? Like this. So here you can see one example of an alligator developed in our lab. So this robot is able to move on the ground. It can turn around. And so on and so forth. Then these are six-legged gates. Here a robot has 6 legs, and with 6 legs it is able to climb on more uneven type of terrain. So with 6 legs at a time, minimum 3 legs are always on the ground. So it is a statically stable gate, or what is also called as passively stable gate. This kind of locomotion you often see in cockroaches, right? For example, where they have 6 legs and 3 legs are always in contact with the ground. So suppose that we have we have the 6 legs. So you can see that this leg on middle leg on one side and the side legs, the front and rear legs on the other side are in contact with ground, and then all of them are in contact with ground, and then it is swapped. Here you can see the swapping. So this is a 6-legged gate. Then let us now look at wheel locomotion. There are different types of wheels used in robotics. So this is an example of a standard wheel. A standard wheel has 2 degrees of freedom. It can rotate about this point of contact like this, or it can also rotate about this axis. So it has 2 degrees of freedom. The same 2 degrees of freedom are there in caster wheel also, but there is a difference. That difference is this offset between the point of contact of wheel with the ground and the axis about which the wheel can rotate. So this offset characterizes the caster wheel. So this also has 2 degrees of freedom. So please note that a wheel cannot move sideways actually. This is not possible. Okay, it can only move in this direction. However, you might have seen those office chairs with 5 caster wheels. You can move them in any direction, and that any direction movement is possible because of this offset. Because of this offset, whichever direction you pull a chair, you will see wheels getting aligned in that direction. And then we have this example of ball wheel, which are omnidirectional. It has, it is more difficult to realize, and it has very low ground clearance. So here you have a spherical type of. It's usually not used. Then we have Swedish wheel, also called as mechanism wheel. This is similar to standard wheel, except for the fact that on the periphery of this wheel, there are these shapes known as mechanism, which you can see over here also. So these are passive shapes, means these are not moved by a motor, but because of this, the robot or this vehicle is able to go in any direction, as you can see. So you can see that this can even slide sideways. The only limitation of these kind of wheels is that it is more complex, and it can damage the surfaces because of the presence of the mechanism. So what is the minimum number of wheels needed for static stability? Well, one may think it is 3, but it turns out that actually 2 in a special case when center of mass lie below the axle. This is an example where there are only 2 wheels, and it is designed in such a way that its center of mass is below the axle. Axle means the axis passing through this wheels. Right, so if we have this axle, it is designed in such a way that the center of mass is below this, then it will be statically stable. Otherwise, there are different types of wheel arrangements. So here you can see 2-wheel arrangement. So this is a bicycle, for example, right? So the front wheel can be steered and rear wheel is fixed. But this can be also like this, where you can have 2 wheels on the side as opposed to as bicycle, and if center of gravity is below this, then you can imagine that it will be statically stable. There can be 3-wheel vehicles where these 2 fixed wheels are used for the actuation, whereas a spherical wheel is used for providing support. So if we change the speeds of these 2 wheels, then it can also turn. So this is similar structure, and this is another structure which is more like a rickshaw. Omnidirectional drive can have 3 standard wheels put at 120-degree phase lag, and with that it can actually go in any direction. So for static stability of 3-wheel configuration, center of mass should lie within the triangle formed by contact points between wheels and ground. But if there are more than 4 wheels, or 4 wheels or more than that, then it will give you higher stability. However, if you have 4 wheels, then there may be times when one wheel may go out of the plane of other 3 wheels, and for that reason we need suspension. That's why in cars we have suspension system, so that if it goes on uneven terrain, then because of the suspension, uh, the contact of the wheel with the ground can be ensured at all times. If there are bigger wheels, then higher obstacles can be overcome. It requires larger torque and elaborate gearbox. More arrangements, most of the arrangements are holonomic. Uh, so that's something that is beyond the right now, I mean, scope of this 2-hour lecture. But non-holonomic constraints involve some non-integrable constraints, right? So most of these wheeled systems will have non-holonomic constraints that makes control little involved. So if we combine actuation and steering on one single wheel, then we say that vehicle is under actuated. It is more, it requires more complex control scheme. So what we have seen that if we use legs in a robot, then it can go on very complex terrains. But legs provide you poor efficiency or higher power consumption. Wheels move uniformly, therefore gives you better efficiency. However, it cannot go on all types of terrains. For example, wheels may get stuck in sand, right? Or it may not be able to go on highly uneven terrains. So can we get best of both worlds? And it is possible by using rovers. So here you can see a rover. In a rover, legs are used, and at the end, towards the end of legs, there are these wheels. So because of the wheels, the motion is more uniform, and therefore the system will be having higher efficiency. But at the same time, it can go on more uneven terrain. Let us look at this video. So you can see that this system can move at much uniform rate, unlike legged locomotion, but at the same time, it can go on highly uneven terrains also. So this is called as a rover. This kind of design is used in interplanetary explorers. You might be thinking that then why don't we use rovers? Why do we go for legs or wheels? Because rovers are best from both perspectives. Well, uh, you know, in engineering, there is no free lunch. If you are improving in terms of efficiency and the terrain traversability, then you are doing worse in terms of design complexity. With the rovers are more complex to design actually. It will be more expensive. So that's the reason it is used mostly in applications where funding is not an issue. For example, Mars rover. So you just want to send one Mars rover on the planet Mars at this point of time. So therefore, space agency has a lot of money, so they can spend on this kind of sophisticated locomotion. But you cannot drive this. You cannot have a car because there are many of them that have to be manufactured. So now let us look at crawling-based locomotion and the corresponding robots that have been developed, keeping in consideration crawling. So snakes and worms perform crawling-based locomotion. Snakes are vertebrate. They have 100 to 400 vertebra. You can see these vertebral structure over here. In fact, it has a very long body, but it has only 3 types of bones: skull, vertebra, or ribs, although a lot of them. So the stretchability of backbone is very less actually. They are not elastic, but they're very flexible. The scales of snake's body have a very special property, which is known as anisotropic friction. So if you look at a snake, then its roughness. So suppose that this hand, if you can see my video, it represents a snake's body. Then if you move your hand from its head to tail, you will feel that it is much smooth compared to if you move from side to side. So the coefficient of friction is higher in the lateral direction compared to in the longitudinal direction. This anisotropic friction is used for its movement. If snakes do not have anisotropic friction, then it won't be able to move. So the snake's vertebra is shown over here, and each vertebra is connected to the next one by means of this ball and socket kind of joint, which is shown over here. This is the ball type. This is the socket type structure in the vertebral bone, and there is a ball type structure as well. So Snakes use various cyclic forms of locomotion like lateral undulation, concertina, rectilinear, side winding, and then there are others like slide pushing, jumping, rolling, climbing, swimming, etc. So let's try to understand some of the snake locomotion, and then we will look at the robots that implement these. So lateral undulation is one very widely used locomotion by snake. So here you can see that the snake's body, there is an S-shaped wave that moves in a snake's body. So this S-shaped wave moves from tail to head, and it keeps on happening. So if we, let us say, if we take a very small element of this snake's body, and we pay attention to the friction force experienced by it, well, the thing is that the normal reaction is perpendicular to the ground. So the friction force will have two components, right? One will be along the body, and another will be perpendicular to the body or perpendicular to this element. It turns out, as I told you, that the friction, the coefficient of friction from head to tail is less, or in longitudinal direction, mu longitudinal is less than mu lateral. That's the way the skin is there. So it turns out that the coefficient of friction in the lateral direction is large, and therefore the friction force in the lateral direction will be large. In longitudinal direction, it will be relatively less. I can draw it with this small line. And then we can take the component of these. So this component, if we take, then in the perpendicular direction to the snake's motion, which is actually this, right? You have one large component, and the component, because of the this small component, right, that will be less and can be ignored. So it turns out that at different places, if you keep on making this elements, for example, then you will have another component over here. So all the lateral components will cancel each other, and this longitudinal components will add, and they will propel the snake in the forward direction, and the lateral direction will balance out each other. So what we learned from this is that because of the anisotropic friction, the robot can actually, not robot, but in this case, snake can move ahead. However, here a large S-shaped wave goes through the snake's body, which requires a lot of space. So there is a limitation. So for that, snake uses what is called as concertina progression. So here, the snake makes these kind of elbows in its body. Because of its long body, these elbows it can make, and using friction at these anchor points, it can move ahead. So it requires lesser space, but again, it requires a stopping and starting kind of motion, so efficiency is poor. So here I'll show you the animation to make the ideas more clear. So at the top, you can see the example of lateral undulation. The S-shaped wave is passing through the snake's body, and thereby you can see that the motion is more uniform, continuous. Continuous motion means efficiency is higher. Okay, but it requires larger space, and because of the large space requirement, this locomotion is um, that is one of the bad parts about this locomotion. On the other hand, in the bottom, you can see concertina. So in concertina, snake makes these kind of elbows in its body and then moves ahead. So this is slower motion, but it requires much narrow space. It will be using, the snake will be using this kind of locomotion in very narrow spaces, and where it does not want to come in the eyes of a predator. So the efficiency is poor in this case, in the case of concertina, because the motion is stop and start kind of motion, not continuous motion. Then the other category of locomotion, serpentine locomotion, is rectilinear motion. So here the muscle shift the snake's ribs linearly. You can see this image here, and it the contact point at the snake's underbelly uh, provides the traction, right? So that traction is provided by the scales, the anisotropic scale. So even there is variability of friction in the forward direction and in the backward direction. That means that if you touch the snake's body from head to tail or from tail to head, there will be different smoothness. And that helps the snake to move ahead, because the friction in the forward direction should be less compared to friction in the backward direction. In the backward direction, friction should be more, so that the snake can always move ahead. So that is what is done in rectilinear motion. In side winding, the snake makes its body like a helix and then it rolls. So here you can see this two gates also. In the top, you can see the linear rectilinear gate of the snake. And then here in the bottom, you can see the side winding. So snake's body is made like a helix and it rolls. So this is a fast locomotion, and it can move even, it can help the snake move even on sand. So well, you have understood how snakes move. Now let us try to understand how snake robots are made which perform these similar kind of locomotion. So usually snake robots are made by means of these modules. So the way we design the snake robots is by making one module and then joining these many modules back to back. So in one module, the energy supply and the actuators and controllers, everything is kept at the module. So when you join these back to back, then you get this snake kind of robot. So here you can see the concept of hyper redundant design. So what do we mean by hyper redundant design? Well, what is the meaning of word redundant? Redundant means something which is more than necessary. Something which is more than necessary. So for example, if we look at a plane, then on a plane, suppose that I take this example. Let's say there is this frame of reference. In this frame of reference, suppose I want to put a point. So how many variables I need to describe this point? Well, I need x, comma y. Okay, two variables I need. So it has 2 degrees of freedom. Yeah, in other words, you can imagine this point to be like an ant. So ant can move either along x-axis or along y-axis or a combination of that. But it cannot, for example, rotate if we are looking at a very tiny point. But now suppose that we have one more point, and that also is described by this x dash and y dash, let us say. And both the points will move in any direction, then therefore there are 4 degrees of freedom now of this system. But suppose we join these 2 points with a line, and we say that this line is rigid. For example, 2 ants are trying to carry one big uh, long object, or two you can have a rod, for example, right, that the 2 ants are trying to carry. So then in that case, it turns out that because of this additional constraint, there are now only 3 degrees of freedom. Means 2 plus 2, 4 minus 1 constraint is 3. And it's true, right? Because you need to specify the location of any point on this line and its rotation theta. So you need this xc, yc, and also theta c. So 3 degrees of freedom are necessary for specifying any rigid body on a plane. But suppose you have more number of degrees of freedom than 3, then you will call those as redundant degrees of freedom. Okay. So for example, if we have, let us say, something like this, where you have one joint in the middle. So this has more than 3 degrees of freedom, isn't it? Like we have one angle this, theta 1, another angle this, theta 2, and then we need two more numbers to describe any one point on this. So there are 4 degrees of freedom in this particular case. So 4 minus 3 is 1. So 1 redundant degree of freedom. If the number of redundant degrees of freedom is very large, then we call that as hyper-redundant. So very large doesn't have any specific number, we just say very large. So in the case of snakes, we have hyper-redundant design. Hyper-redundant design has certain advantages, like it can be segmented into many different robots. It can be repaired. Suppose one of the module is faulty, then even without that module, it can move because it has redundancy. But disadvantage is that it has small payload capacity and speed is slow. And there are too many joints for individual control. So here you can see a video of one single module. At the top, you can see the CAD model, and in the bottom, you can see animation of one single module. So now you can mentally visualize that these modules, if you connect back to back, then you can come up with a robot, a snake type of robot. So here you can see various examples of snake robots. Here there is one animation. You can see that this snake robot is performing lateral undulation, very much like a snake. At the bottom, you can see another example of this snake robot, which is performing rectilinear locomotion. Okay. And then we have example of self-reconfigurable robots, where the long snake body can break down and it can connect it in different ways. For example, it can make itself like a legged robot, and so on and so forth. So why people bother about developing snake-inspired robots? What is the reason? If you have a scenario where the robots have to perform search and rescue in an earthquake, then victims may be stuck in some place, and if you move things too much, then you may actually harm or damage the victims. So it's very difficult to search for victims. So therefore, these very narrow snake-like robots can go into nooks and corners and can identify or detect the stuck victims, so that some action can be taken. On the right hand side, you can see another example where the snake robots can be used, where snake robots can actually go into pipes and perform inspection and such kind of activities. So in summary, snakes can traverse obstacles, they can span gaps, they can climb steps, they can negotiate steep slopes, they can traverse on various surfaces like sand, water, trees, etc. Any questions till now?
One participant has written one question in chat box.
Okay.
I think he has written how role of robot in electrical engineering.
Role of electrical engineering in field of robotics. Right. So I mean, there is a lot, right? As I described to you that a robot is is an interdisciplinary field where you need sensors, microcontrollers, right, and then controls. Uh, you need actuators. So all of that is electrical engineering, isn't it? Like in actuators, you study about motors and so on and so forth. So that is part of electrical engineering. In controls, uh, control theory is part of electrical engineering, right? Then sensors are part of electrical engineering. So there's a lot.
It's come under hardware of system.
Yeah, hardware as well as in software, right? So if you have control systems, for example, so that is part of that's not necessarily part of hardware, right? So that is also electrical engineering.
Any other participants have any question?
Okay, so then let's try to cover some more material. There's 2 hours, right? So let's take some more things. So then there are worm-based locomotion, right? So worm-based locomotion means that you have seen different types of worms, right? So usually you can imagine, I mean, this is a very simplistic description of a worm, but you can imagine a worm to be like a cylinder. Okay. So if you stretch a cylinder like this, then what happens to the diameter? The diameter will reduce. Okay. It will become less. So if volume you write as pi r square L, then dr by dl will be minus r by 2L. So as the length is increased, the radius reduces basically. Okay. In fact, the similar thing you observe in the case of different types of worms. So here you can see an example of two anchor crawling seen in a leech. So a leech, in Hindi we call it as joke, right? So this has two anchors at the front and at the end, which are known as also suckers. So these suckers have frictional anisotropy. Because of that, the friction in the backward direction is much higher and in the forward direction is less. So what it does is that it stretches its body. As you can see, length is increased, radius is reduced, and then it sticks its sucker, front sucker on the ground and then contracts its body. And that is how it performs movement. This is one form of worm locomotion, which is called as two anchor crawling. Then a caterpillar may show three anchor crawling. I showed you a video of a caterpillar where there are three anchors. So you have some legs in the middle, some in like one in the back and one in the front. So by alternately moving this, the caterpillar can move ahead. Then third variety of locomotion in worms is called as peristalsis. So peristalsis is seen in earthworms. So here you can see that a wave of expansion and contraction goes through the body. Let's look at this animation. So here some of the front segments are contracted, and in between there is a stretching of the of certain segments. So this wave of contraction and expansion goes through the body from front to back, and based upon that it walks, not walks but crawls. So there are various robots that are inspired by this worm locomotion. So here you can see this earthworm inspired locomotion. Here this motor is used And this special mechanism is made with which the waves of expansion and contraction goes from front to back, and by means of that there are these points of contact where the friction is anisotropic, with which it can go on the ground and then it can move ahead. Then there is this another example of peristaltic locomotion. Here, shape memory alloys are used, so we don't use they don't use motors. Rather, they use what is called as a shape memory alloy, which are like wires for performing actuation. So it is very robust actually. Unlike motors, it doesn't. There is nothing to break here. It basically actuates by means of wires. And then this is three anchor crawling type locomotion found in caterpillar. It's also another type of robot. Then there are aquatic locomotion. So aquatic means underwater locomotion. So underwater creatures are fishes. If you pay attention to any fish, they have two types of fins, caudal fin and median and paired fins. So caudal fin is like tail fin. Okay. And then there are median and paired fins which appear in pairs. So by means of undulation and oscillation of these fins, the fish can move. So these are various types of locomotion found in fishes based upon undulation of the body and oscillation of the body and undulation and oscillation of the median and paired fins. Without getting too much into details of this, let's look at some examples. So this is known as anguilliform locomotion, where the body where you can see that the body is undulating. This is also a kind of fish. The amplitude of oscillation at the head is much less compared to the tail, and these waves go through the body, and by means of these undulatory waves, the fish produces propulsion. So these are different types of robots that perform underwater locomotion. So here the body is similar, body structure is similar to an anguilliform fish, which is long, right? And then it can oscillate. Here subcarangiform locomotion is shown, where what we observe is that the front part of the body is held rigid while the posterior part undulates, and by means of that it produces propulsion. So these are different types of robots that uses or that implements this carangiform type of locomotion. In the front part, which is held rigid, all the controller and batteries are kept, and the rear part is made flexible. So these are various examples. And then this ostraciform type of robot have oscillation of the tail. So this is seen in boxfish, where tail is oscillated, as you can see. So that kind of fin is provided on a robot, as you can see here. Over here also you can see the tail fin which oscillates, and by means of that it moves. Then there are these paired fins, as you can see here. So these fins on the side are undulating, right? So likewise, we can have this representative robot where you can see this pair of fins on the side. Then there are these fishes which have anal fins which run along the body, and undulation of that is used by the fish to produce locomotion. So similar robots have also been made. So here you can see in a robot, this kind of anal fin is designed, which allows it to perform locomotion. And then there are these rajiform fishes where the fins perform both undulation and oscillation at the same time. So this kind of locomotion is also implemented in robots where you see these fin rays that are fabricated, and then it can perform locomotion by both undulation and oscillation of the fins. Okay. So in a nutshell, what I'll say is that the uh, key challenges of mobile robotics is lies in the design of robots. I've shown you various examples of um, animal locomotion and how they can be used in developing robots. Why would one use animal locomotion for developing robots? Well, animals are very successful in their environment, and suppose we want to send a robot in a certain environment, then we would like to develop our robot based upon the animal that lives in that environment. So suppose we want to send a robot in sandy environment, in a desert, then we might look at camel, for example, right, which can easily move in a desert environment. And we should develop a robot copying the good features of camel that allows it to move in the desert. Okay. Or if we are talking about very deep oceans, then there, if we want to send a robot, then we should look at the fishes that dwell at that depth, because the fishes survive the high hydrostatic pressure because of the depth. So the robot should also be developed based upon how these fishes overcome this high hydrostatic pressure. So taking a clue from the environment, from the animals, and then developing a right type of robot, um, that kind of design is one critical challenge. Communication is another challenge. So how robot communicates with other robots, and within robot also how different components communicate with each other. For example, underwater robots, the radio signals will attenuate underwater. So how do we communicate? Maybe we can use acoustic communication. Then it has its own uh, challenges. How do we design it and how we use it? So this kind of communication is another challenge in which people are working, and there's a lot of work needed to be done. Energy consumption, energy storage and consumption, these are another issues that need to be dealt with when developing mobile robots, because these mobile robots should operate for a longer period, and for such a long period the batteries should be able to have that much of energy. First of all, they should be rechargeable rapidly, right? And then at the same time they should not be very bulky. So this is another area where one can work on for even if you are working in battery technology, for example, right? So you can contribute a lot in mobile robotics. Then knowing about the environment, building maps. This is a computer science problem, right? So you have the in sensor information, for example, the point cloud in the vicinity of the robot, and how do you convert it into a suitable map which can be used by the robot. Localization. So once you create the map, then you have to localize where the robot is located in this map. So that is another computer science problem or electrical engineering problem. Then determining the optimal plan or navigation, right? So suppose all of you must have used GPS, right? So you know that if you are at a certain place and you look for the path to another place, then an optimal path is determined by the GPS. So that path is determined based upon how that vehicle will move. I mean, based upon the roads. Of course, it doesn't give you a path through some agricultural fields, right? Because GPS gives you path for the car. So for the robot, which may be capable of going through fields also, different kind of planner is needed. So that kind of planning algorithm has to be developed, and that is another area of mobile robotics. Then executing plan efficiently. So once the plan is there, then how does the robot execute that plan? The control algorithms, the control laws, that has to be also developed. So that is another area where mobile robotics needs a lot of people to work. So the state of the art in robotics technology involve, in terms of hardware, smart materials. So a lot of people are exploring smart materials like electroactive polymers, shape memory alloys, magnetorheological fluids, piezoelectric materials, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going into details of these in today's talk. Time is not sufficient, but if you know these names and if you're interested, you can study. You can look up on Google and start studying these areas and then contribute. If you want to, let us say, uh, perform research, then you can work in these areas, how you can use smart materials for mobile robotics. Software robot operating system is now almost a de facto standard for operating robots. So if you want to work in the area of robotics, you can learn ROS. ROS is freely available on the internet. You can download and you can learn. Cloud enabled robotics is another area where people are working. Internet of Things, IoT, that is another area where robotics gets benefited. So these are different state of the art. The field of robotics is very useful for different applications. For example, these kind of big dog robots that were developed by Boston Dynamics were inducted in US Army, right? So nowadays humans may be replaced in many places, many dangerous places by robots. Humans do not have to risk their lives. In fact, in many places in the world, self-driving cars are becoming a reality. In fact, not only that people are working on the technology of self-driving cars, but now even the insurance and the regulating authorities are preparing for self-driving cars. So you can imagine, even people who are working in law or legal areas, uh, it's a problem for them, right? So suppose that uh, self-driving cars come on the roads. It may be very difficult on Indian roads, but on many international roads or in highly developed cities of India also, it is possible. So when that comes, let us say some car meets an accident. Who should be held responsible? Because there is no driver sitting in the car. So should we hold the uh, car company responsible, or should we hold the programmer of the algorithm, or should we hold the company that is providing that algorithm? So these kind of issues people have already started looking into, because the future will be very different. In the future, the way we are right now doing things, and when these robots come on the field, they will be completely different. Looking for lost aircrafts like MH370 that was lost, robots could be used. Even in India, Navy is thinking of using robots and unmanned aircrafts, drones, etc. Right? Non-contact wars will require robotics. So I'm showing you these news from 2014. Now it's 2021, 7 years, and still people are working in this in India, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done actually. So, okay, that brings me to the end of this talk. I would like to thank my funding agencies, SERB, Fast Track Scheme, my students, and my collaborators for this. And also, I thank the organizers of this FTP for having me share my ideas. Thank you. There are questions?
Thank you, sir. Yes. Any participants have any doubt or any question related to this mobile robot? So just you raise your hand, or you can write on chat box so that, or you can raise your hand. I will unmute you. So anyone? Yes, one participant has raised hand. So I will unmute you.
Yeah.
I have unmuted you. Mary
Thank you.
Catherine.
Thank you, sir, for your such an informative talk on mobile robots. Sir, I have a doubt. Like we have heard about soft robotics. Is it inspired by snake locomotion?
Yeah, good question.
And also, what is the scope of soft robotics in the near future? Will it replace the hard robotics? Because we hear a lot of soft robotics now. So, what will be the applications of soft robotics? If you could help me in that.
Sure. Thank you, Miss Catherine.
Thank
So,
you, sir.
soft robotics is an area where we want to develop robots that have continuum motion, unlike discrete motion. So, you can imagine that a snake can be visualized as a bunch of rigid bodies connected back to back via some revolute joints. Okay. On the other hand, if you look at a real snake, it's not that it has these discrete motions. It has a very continuous motion. So soft robotics can be enabled only by means of soft actuators. The actuators that we have today are mostly discrete actuators, like motors, for example, right? Electrical motors. So for that, we need smart materials like shape memory alloys or electroactive polymers. So those can be used for making soft robots that can have continuous motions as opposed to discrete motions. So the question about whether soft robotics can completely replace the discrete motions, it depends upon the application. So say you have an application where the robot has to interact with humans. So there you want soft behavior. That means that suppose there is a collision, then the robot should bend, right? It should not like push the human body and then break it, right? So in those applications, soft behavior is important. But then, with softness comes the issue of control. The control is more difficult, more complex there. If there is a discrete motion, then control is much easier. So for applications where you just need to pick and place something, discrete motion is probably better. But suppose the application is pick and place, but it is done in tandem with some human also in the loop somewhere in the operation. So the collisions should be not hurting humans. So in that case, soft robotics can be helpful, but then it comes with the cost of extra control effort. So it depends, the application. And smart actuators, there are many limitations in the at present. So that's why, for example, let me tell you the limitations. So force, for example, so getting high force using smart actuators is a bit difficult, right? So that makes its use little difficult. Smart actuators are a bit more difficult to control. Say if you take smart shape memory alloys, it's it's not very easy to precisely control it. Not as easy as we have, we can control an electrical motor. So there are always pros and cons of technology, and in a nutshell, I can tell you that soft robotics will be helpful for developing robots that operate uh, in the environment where humans are also present, and you don't want to hurt humans. But then control effort and implementation is, it requires more research. So it's a very fertile area for research, actually.
Another
Thank you, sir.
participant,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
other participants have unmuted you, Dr. Ram Kumar.
Hello, sir. Good morning.
Morning.
Sir, how can we use a robot in a high tension wire or high voltage applications in the electrical domain?
So when you say uh, high voltage environment means what? Like,
Um,
can you elaborate a little bit?
where, sir, a high tension wire is passes through the line, that area where the normal human being cannot reach.
Correct. So see, so first of all, even if you have high tension lines, if you do not close the circuit, then there is no risk, right? Obviously,
Yes.
if humans go in that area, they may commit a mistake, and then
Yes.
like there is a chance that they will die. On the other hand, the chances of mistakes by a robot will be relatively less because their movement can be precisely controlled. Okay, so and if at all there is a mistake, then after all you will lose the robot, not human being, right? So how you can do it? I mean, I don't think that there will be anything different that has to be done. The only thing different that has to be done is the motion coordination.
Thank you, sir.
I think any of the participant have raised a question. Okay, another participant, Sneha Kumari, she has raised hand, so I will unmute you. Rohitana.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your such an informative session. Sir, I would like to ask when you were discussing a crawling based locomotion, and under that you have discussed lateral undulation. So, and you have taken an example of we can use a reptile kind of movement in when earthquake or any natural disasters happen, then we can save victim beneath the walls or broken building. So, what if even our robot is on work and damage happens to our robot as well? So, what will our next take?
Right. So you remember that we were talking about hyper redundant design. So hyper redundant design means there are large number of joints. So suppose some joints or some links fail, still there are others. You can compensate with that. So in these kind of, I mean, the snake robot will be more robust actually compared to other robots, because other robots, if one joint fails, the whole robot will stop working. Whereas you can imagine, right, that let's say that the snake is hurt at some point in its body, still somehow it will drag because there are many other joints in its body that can allow it to move. So the robustness has to be high. It should be more rugged actually for operating in these kind of environments.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In demonstration, like a warm kind of locomotion, hammer was striking on the body of robot.
Yes.
And it was
Right.
so robust.
Right, exactly.
Thank
So
you.
that's how these robots will have to be designed. But then that was a lab robot, right? The hammer striking thing. What you could have also seen that there is a wire that is coming out and it is being powered externally. So there was a limitation of that robot also. That although it was very rugged, but it did not have the battery and all those things inside it. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done yet in this area. People have demonstrated these capabilities separately, but everything put together in one robotic system and operating, still people are working.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your informative session. And this was really a very interesting topic for the PhD students, MTech students who are doing research in the field of robotics. So a lot of work need to be done in this field. Like just now, one participant asked how it can be used in electrical engineering background field. And I would like to thank you, sir, from behalf of Katihar Engineering College, Government of Bihar. So you have agreed to give your session. It was really very wonderful session, sir. We have learned a lot. And thank you, sir. Once again, I thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Shall we close the session now?
Yes, sir. We can close now, sir.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you, Dr. Yadav.
Thank you, sir. Participants, we have lunch time now. So we will meet at 1 o'clock. We have another one technical session from 1 to 3, and then we'll start validity session where we have one test. So we'll start test at 4 o'clock, but validity session will start at 3:15. You can join the next session from 1 to 3. Thank you all.